much of your time. So thank you everybody for joining the Digitized Diasporic Memory Workshop by Candide Uyanze. I don't know if all of you know much about Candide. For me, I had the pleasure to just meeting her a few minutes virtually. Candide is a multimedia, multidisciplinary, and multi-hyphenate doer of things. She's been described as producer, digital artist, video editor, photographer, designer, researcher, teacher, daughter, sister, and friend. Her practice explores diasporic storytelling, immersive web experiences, open source tools, accessible media production, African languages, and online networks and communities. Candy holds an EMDS in Digital Futures from OCAD University and an honor bachelor's in Communication and Digital Humanities from the University of Ottawa. Thank you, Candide, for doing this workshop for us.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for joining this talk. So before I get started, I just wanted to give some notes before I really dive into the presentation. So this presentation is about digitized diasporic memory, which is a thesis that I completed last year as part of my Master's of Design, as Carla mentioned. So essentially, the first part of the presentation will talk a bit more about what the project is and how it came to be. And then the second part will go into the software that I used and those different components. So because the project I did was like research creation, I kind of approached this presentation the same way. So I talk a bit about the research and then the creative part of things. So you're free for the second part of the presentation. It was, I think it was asked to download LogSeq. You're free to follow along and try to do work on it as I'm working on it. I also have like an example project to share later. But otherwise, feel free to just watch. Since this is being recorded, you'll be able to rewatch it and try it yourself after the presentation. So I made a web page with all like the slides and all the references and whatnot. So I'll just share that in the chat. Right here. Yeah, so that's the webpage. It has the slides, the downloads, and everything that would be referenced in the presentation. And during the presentation, feel free to ask questions. This isn't like I'm not a super formal person, so feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. I'll also have a Q&A at the end if we have time, but it's nice to ask questions as the presentation is going so that you get an answer in context. Okay, so if we're good to go, I will start sharing my screen and then dive into the presentation. Okay. Okay, are you able to see a yellow screen?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
Yeah. We can see it now.
You can see it? Okay, perfect. All right. So you know that moment when you hear a sound and the sound reminds you of a memory and the memory takes you to your favorite place? Well, imagine connecting these thoughts with the memories of others, or what Anne-Laure Le Cunff describes as mind-to-mind networks. So Anne-Laure talks about the internet as this giant mental network. In theory, it would be possible to create a miniature version of the web where everybody kind of builds on and riffs off of everybody else's experiences. So for my thesis, Digitized Diasporic Memory, I considered how we can work with network thinking, memory, and community in the digital sphere. What if members of the African diaspora could expand their own networks of memories, connect them to the memories of others, and build stronger connections and learn from each other? So that's what I set out to do. Let's talk about digitized diasporic memory and what it is exactly. So it's a research creation thesis made up of 4 components. So there was a database, a network graph, a thesis document, and a website. So for the first component, which was the database, I recruited Black participants of African descent residing on Turtle Island, so North America, for a month-long study. So together we met, we brainstormed some different prompts, and then we entered them in the database. So the prompts included things like memories, things you remember hearing when you were younger, expressions your elders would say, etc. So once we had those prompts, each participant was invited to listen to the prompts and responses of others and then add their own responses. So they had the choice of recording themselves and then adding the responses in the database and then indicating which response in the database they were responding to. So I'll show a video that kind of illustrates how this works. And to do so, we used this program here called Airtable, which is a spreadsheet database hybrid that I really like using. So as you can see, you can add an entry, give it a title, and then in here you can indicate what other entry you are responding to. You can add your name and then upload a file with the audio. So everyone recorded on their phones or on their microphones or whatever audio recording device that they had. And then once we had a few entries in there, we listened to those initial responses during synchronous sessions. So we met on Jitsi, which is like a Zoom, but open source and no login required. And yeah, so we listened to some of the responses and then we responded to them live as a conversation. So these conversations were also recorded. They were trimmed into segments. So a segment is one person speaking, and then I put them back into the database. And people had a chance to, once again, re-listen, re-respond to things. So it was like this cyclical iterative process until the end of the month-long study. So once I transferred the database from Airtable to NocoDB, so NocoDB is very similar to Airtable, but it allowed me to set a dedicated storage space with public links so that I could reuse those audio segments in a different web application. So from there, I generated a network graph, which illustrates the relationships between all the audio segments. And this visualization of the database as a graph is where each node in the graph is an audio segment, and you can click on a node to listen to it. So this is a video kind of giving a demo of the experience. It's not the best quality since I had to record it, so I'll actually just show it to you live. So this is the website of the project, and if you go in diasporic memory and access the experience, you will see kind of like what the video was showing. So click on explore the memories, and then you have a network graph. I'm just going to fix this quickly. There we go. So yeah, you have a network graph. So every node in here is an audio segment. There was, I think, a little under 200 segments between the 7 participants. So for example, if I click here, I'm able to access that audio. Still working on getting all the transcripts in there, but yeah, you should be able to listen to an audio.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to Trish about this offline because we're actually in the same program. And
anyway, so then every page is like an audio segment, and then connected thoughts shows you either a response to that or what the person was responding to. So if I click here, it shows you another audio segment. So you can browse the audio segments through their relationships. You can browse them in their entirety as a graph. You can also access all of the pages in a list view. And when you're in a page, you can also see what other, if you click on page graph, you can see what other audio segments are related. So to create this web experience, I use Lockseek, which is the program that I will be talking about in the second part. And yeah, to access what I just showed you, it's at demo.diasporamemory.com, and a link to that should be in the webpage that I sent you. It should be somewhere down there. Next slide. All right. So the diasporic memory network graph was exhibited at OCAD's GradX and at our thesis exhibition for my program. And the way that I displayed it in the space was on a giant touchscreen TV. I wanted it to be on the wall, but we couldn't do that safely, so it was put on the table and people were able to click on it and interact it with it that way. And I had speakers so that people could listen to the audio segments. So after the research and creation, of course, I had to write a thesis document. So in the document, I dive deeper into the theory, the concepts, the research methods, the design process, and I have a link here to the document and on the webpage that I shared earlier. And then lastly, there's the website. So I'm going to play a little demo of the website. The website links back to all the other components. And I'm currently working on creating detailed tutorials on how the database archive / interactive web application was created. All right. Oops. Oh. Here we go. Okay. So I started to think about the idea of archives as conversation. So I didn't go into this project thinking that I would create an archive, but the more that I kind of explored this idea of people responding to each other, the more I became interested in the idea of archives as conversations and archives of conversations. So this idea of connecting the past, present, and future ideas, memories, sounds, emotions of the collective, and doing so in a way that was kind of scattered and nonlinear, and that mimics the way that we recall information. And I felt like this defied Western concepts of time and space. Right. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering, because you're mentioning like all of these connections, but it's so broad, like the questions you have there, they're also like so broad and connected like to memories and different experiences, and also there's like this oral component to it. But I was wondering, how do you do like how do you create like the sort of like categories, which are not exactly categories, to kind of make these connections? How was the show's made?
Mm-hmm. So there weren't any categories. So the starting off point, if I can, I think what I'll do is I'll actually go on the website and show you a bit of the database, because the database kind of shows how the entries came in order of when they were added. So we started with prompts. So there wasn't really any categories. My idea was to think about memories and recreating sounds and that kind of thing, and that's where it started. And then the project was really open to tangents and kind of derailing and going off on different things. So people are singing songs, they're sharing memories, they're talking about their childhood and that kind of thing. So there weren't any rigid categories. It was really just an opportunity for people of African descent of different ethnicities to kind of exchange and share similarities and learn from each other, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, that's helpful. I love that there are not categories like are rigid. So
yeah. All right. So give me 1 second. I just need to find something in here. Sorry, one second.
Shirley, did you have a question? You're muted.
Quick question, Candide. I just wondered, did you're gathering diasporic community? Did you make any distinction between like must be born in Canada or continental, or, you know, like, were there any parameters, or was it all kind of mixed?
That's
Because
a
there's
good,
so much diversity within that category of diasporic.
that's a good question. So I'll actually go back to the list of participants. There's a few slides back. So it was open to anybody who identified as Black of African descent. So I didn't say, oh, you have to be born here or come from here. What did end up happening though, is that most of the participants were people I knew. So most of the participants were Congolese or family members or friends. I had one participant who was Jamaican, one participant who was Burundian, one participant who was Kenyan, and the rest, including myself, were Congolese. So as much as I, wanted it to be open to everybody, I ended up with a sample that was pretty similar to myself. And I didn't get a lot of responses either. So 10 people were invited. So 10 people applied. I invited all 10 to come. And then some people ended up not being able to participate and whatnot. So then I ended up with these 7 participants. So instead of seeing it as like a representative sample or whatnot, I kind of just saw it as like a way to test this web application and see how this format could work of interacting with people both synchronously and asynchronously.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll go back to where I was, just finding myself in my notes. Okay. Okay, there we go. So although I didn't set out to create an archive, like I said, I wanted to be able to connect people and conversations. And one of the major influences of my project was The Last Angel of History. And in this film, there is a segment where writer Greg Tate, who was one of the people interviewed, details how the sampling era collapsed all eras of Black music onto a chip to form a digitized race memory, which is where I got the idea for the title of my thesis. And this allowed Black creatives to freely reference and cross-reference previous generations and sounds simultaneously. In a similar vein, Tabitha Rezaer, in her 2017 video artwork Premium Connect, explores the function of ancestral and traditional memory and how it relates to technology, computer memory, quantum physics, if divination, and the underground network of plants. And one of the protagonists in this video artwork talks about how we only live for one lifetime and can only remember so much as one human being. And that is why we communicate with our ancestors as a divine record of consciousness or divine internet. And this is the graphic at that point in the video artwork that is shown. It's like an exchange of information or divine internet. And this allows us to draw on the collective minds or computers and lifetimes of the ones who came before us. So when I think about the idea of sampling the knowledge from the past, especially in the context of the African diaspora, I consider the importance of oral histories and how in a lot of our cultures, for example, in the West African Rio, there's that role of carrying the collective memory. Sherry Ann Smart has a really interesting text where she talks about the library in crisis, which is embodied within enslaved African people and how they were a repository of skills and knowledge that were orally transmitted to the next generations, even until this day. So it was interesting to see how some of the participants who were immigrants from the African continent versus those who were of Caribbean descent could find some similarities in expressions, in sayings, even though they may not necessarily translate in the same way because of the different languages. It was nice to see that some of those things remained and we had similar ties in that way. And this is why the primary focus of this project was to tap into our overlapping traditions and collective ancestral memory using oral stories in particular. Okay, so the next thing I will go into is logseek. Is there any questions about the, I guess, research or theory of my project before I move on to the more technical part of things?
Like I'm kind of interested in the theory a little bit because it seems like you're framing the internet as a site of diaspora, which is kind of like subverts the idea of diaspora itself. So I was just, I don't know, like, how did you think about that in terms of, yeah, placeness and displaceness?
That's a tough question to answer. I would say, as someone who is, I guess, like on the older side of Gen Z and who's always been online, I've felt like I've really connected with other members of the African diaspora who weren't Canadian online through online communities. So I think for me, online communities have always been an important place to connect with the diaspora. And I can give, I guess, a few examples. I don't know if you're familiar with the natural hair movement, but it was a movement in like the early 2000s for Black women and people to stop using relaxers and embrace our natural hair textures and whatnot. And the internet and online communities and online forums and social media were a big site for those discussions and for that movement. So that's one thing that I would say kind of inspired it. Another thing that inspired it was during the pandemic, there was Twitter Spaces. I don't know if any of you participated in those, but maybe I guess it was based on who I was following, but I noticed a lot of Twitter Spaces, for example, that encouraged like people who were African American and people who were African immigrants in North America to kind of discuss tensions, any stereotypes, and having like difficult conversations among the diaspora, but over Twitter Spaces. So it's like if you don't know, Twitter Spaces is a bit like Clubhouse. So it's a space where you set up a time to meet and then you discuss a certain topic, and then there's like one person who kind of moderates the conversation, but anyone can raise their hand and have a discussion and respond to what other people were saying before. So yeah, I would say that would be probably one part of thinking about diaspora and displacement and online communities. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or if you had anything more that you wanted to know in regards to that.
I was just curious of how you had been thinking through it. Because I know the idea of like diaspora is to be out of place, but then if the internet is a place, but then it can also connect you with the place from which you diasporated. So I don't know. I was just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
And Tabitha Reza, who I talked about previously with her work, Premium Connect, she also has a work that kind of talks about how people of African descent would use the internet as a way to, I guess, reject or question like the idea of Blackness online. So if I can find that text, it's probably somewhere saved in my Zotero. I'll send the link to that. But yeah, it's a good question. I'll probably think about it tonight and have more ideas and add more things on the webpage. But yes, thank you for that question. Okay. So if that's it, I will move on to the next part of the presentation, which is the more technical side of things. Okay. So I will exit out of here. And bring this in. Okay, so this is logseek. So logseek is it's basically a note-taking app. It's part of a suite of tools that people call Second Brain, or digital knowledge gardens, that kind of thing. So maybe you've heard of things like Rome Research or Obsidian or The Brain. So Logseq is very similar to that, but it's open source. So that means that the source code for the program is open. It's very flexible in terms of making modifications. So today I will start off with just talking about how it works in general, how I use it in my own project, and maybe give you some ideas on how you could use it on your own projects. So the first thing you'll have to do is open a local directory, or what they call a graph. So a graph is really just a folder on your computer or your device that contains all the pages, the configurations, all the assets that would be in your project. So I'm going to I'm just going to create a new one. So each graph is essentially like a folder on your computer. So I'll create a new folder. There we go. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call it test demo. And then once you create a new folder, you're presented with this. So it starts off with journal. And in Logseq, the first, I guess you could say, unit of information is the block. So the block is represented here with the bullet point. And a block can contain all kinds of information. So it can have text, it can have past, embedded media, links, code snippets, all that kind of thing. So you can add some text, you can add some view tasks and whatnot. And then to create a block, you just have to hit enter. So every time you hit enter, you're creating new blocks. And to edit a block, you just click inside of it. So you click on it, and then once you click away, you're out of edit mode for the block. And if you want to nest things inside of each other, so let's say you have like a heading, and you want to nest things inside of the heading. So this is info and another block. You're then able to hide and reveal things. So then the next unit, so when you have a multiple blocks, they can be contained in a page. So a page is just many blocks. And in Logseq, there are two types of pages. So this is a journal page, which is turned on by default. But you can also have non-journal pages. And in order to create a new page, you have to write double brackets. So I'll write double brackets and then create a new page that way. So that's one way of creating a new page. And you can also create a new page by using the search button. This one, another page to create it. So now I'm on the other page. So there was journals and regular pages. So then the other nice thing about Logseq is the power of linking things. So as you've seen, when you create a new page, you can navigate to it. So I'll go back to my journal. So you can hover over it and get a preview of what the page looks like, and then click on it to go. And you'll see here a section called linked reference. So linked reference is basically Logseq's way of saying, hey, you know, this other page mentioned you. And, you know, we want to create those links so that you can keep in touch with each other. And the nice thing about these connections is that they are presented in the graph. So you might have to enable some things on here to see them. But yeah, now you can see the new page. You might have to re-index to see all of them. Okay, so yeah, so now you can see the journal page, you can see the new page and a to-do page. I'll go in here on the new page. And you can also see what other pages are connected to the page that you're on by clicking here on the right-hand pane, clicking on the page graph, and then seeing what's connected to it. So if you see here, it says like, hey, this page is connected to that one, and you can navigate to that page as well. So you can, like you have seen, you can reference different pages, but you can also reference blocks. So to reference a block, you have to do 2 parentheses and search for them by just typing in the text. So I'll put in test here, and as you've seen, there's now a number here saying that, hey, there's a reference to this block. So when you click on it, it shows you that this place references it, and you can also jump to the reference that way. And the nice thing about it is if you make any changes to the original block, test 1, 2, 3, and then click away from it, it keeps it up to date, which is nice. So you can have block references within the same page, you can have them on a different page. And another interesting thing that you can do is you can have block references and also embeds. So the difference between embeds and references is that if I right click on here and I do copy block embed, and then I paste it in here, I'm able to edit the text inside of the reference. And once again, it creates a bi-directional link between the reference and the original content. And it also shows a nested content, which doesn't happen for references. So this is a reference, this is a block. Okay, so this was a very quick and dirty crash course to LockSeek. Hopefully that you kind of get it, how it works. So create references between things and links. And this is essentially how I used the program to create the diasporic memory. You will see, though, of course, that it's pretty different from how the default layout looks. So there was a lot of modifications using CSS, which is cascading style sheets. I have some references for anyone who would be interested in doing those kinds of modifications on the webpage that I shared. And I'll also open the graph that I used for my project in here so that you can see how it was set up. So I'll just go back to my folders. Okay, so this is, in a sense, the back end of the diasporic memory graph. And it's just loading because there's a lot of entries. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of elements here that are hidden on the website side of things, but this is essentially what I use to create my my project. And every page that had audio is essentially just a regular page with audio references, who said it, and then links to the connected audio bits or audio segments. And then, of course, I leveraged LockSeek's linking abilities to keep so that people could navigate between different audio segments. Yes, so that's essentially what's going on behind the scenes. The big thing I would say is really the customization of the theme. So changing the backgrounds, changing the fonts, that kind of thing. And once I was ready to put this online, what LockSeek has is an ability to make all the pages public for publishing. And then once you've set them all public for publishing, you can export them as a static website. So as a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript website. So if I click here on export public pages, it will bring up my file browser, and I will just create a new folder, save it in. I'll call this a export test. And it usually has an alert to say like, hey, it's been exported, but it might be taking a little while here. So as you can see in my folders here, it exported it as a website. So as a HTML website. And what that means is that you can host it anywhere that accepts HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. So one place that's really handy to do those is on Netlify Drop. I'll show you a quick demo now. So Netlify Drop is free to use, and it's a place where you can host static site files. And I will show you with the export I just did. So all you do is you drag it, drop it in. Try that again. You drop it in. So after it uploads, it'll say, yay, your site is live. And then, yeah, it'll give you a URL. So because I'm not signed in, it will disappear after some time. But if you sign in, create an account, give it a nice name, you essentially just have a website online that anybody can access. So if I share this link here in the chat, you should be able to access a copy of the diasporic memory. So I'll just drop that in the chat. And yeah, that's a nice way of just sharing what you've worked on online with the world. So I'll go back to Blockseek. Actually, no, I'll go back to the webpage that I shared earlier. So the demo I gave you of Blockseek was, like I said, very quick and dirty, not very in-depth. But if you do want to see the range of things you can do with Blockseek, I would recommend downloading the demo graph here that I have. So you can just click on that link, and there should be an option to download it on your computer. Yeah, so just click on the direct download, unzip it, and I will show you what that graph looks like so that you can get a sense of what I've prepared for you. So I'll go in here to add a new graph, and I will find that test demo. Okay. So then, yeah, you would just unzip the demo graph, open it, and you will find a demo graph project that I prepared for you in case you want to dive deeper into Blockseek. So I have a quick start in here that summarizes what I just explained about blocks and pages and links and that kind of thing. I have the formatting. So as you can see, there's headings. You can add properties, icons. There's quite a bit of formatting that you can do there. So if you just, once again, you click on the bullets or the block, you'll be able to see how to create those different formats. And there's also shortcuts that you can access, I believe, if you click, yeah, if you click on the help button and access the shortcuts. So I clicked, sorry, closed it by accident. But yeah, essentially I have a page there that shows you all the different kinds of formatting that you can apply to your Blockseek pages. Okay, we're here on formatting. Yes, so there's all kinds of formatting that you can add. You can even have flashcards by adding a card tag, and you can access your flashcards in here and review them. You can have tasks and manage those tasks. You can put links, so you can have link to pages. You can use link to pages with different names, add tags. And then, of course, what I did was I embedded media. So if you're also interested in embedding media and seeing how images are embedded, or how video is embedded, YouTube videos are embedded, that kind of thing, this is a great reference just to look at and see. And yeah, there's like also like a timestamping feature with YouTube. And I've also added a reference here that shows you how to embed different media in different ways. So yeah, it's pretty extensive. And this just kind of scratches the surface. And since creating my thesis, they've introduced a new feature called whiteboards, which are, I'm gonna click on, skip the tour. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, which is like a, I guess, endless canvas where you can kind of add blocks and content wherever you want and scribble on it, add arrows, all that kind of thing. So that's a nice feature that, once again, they've added recently. And yes, so that's essentially my quick demo of Lockseek. Like I said, I have some more resources both on the webpage that I shared earlier and on this demo graph. And there's a lot you can do. So you could use Lockseek to create what I did, like a shared knowledge base of audio between people. You could use it as a blog that you publish online and share with people. Just finding myself in my notes. Yeah, you can use the whiteboards to do to collect inspiration. You can create games with it. So it's pretty flexible. It's used, of course, for note taking, but there's all kinds of possibilities that you can do with it. So that's the end of my presentation. We're now in the Q&A portion of things. So is there any questions, anything that anyone wants me to redo or review or explain further?
Thank you, Candide. We have actually some questions. I think Shelly and Rebecca raised their hand. Shelly, go ahead.
Thank you, that was great. My question is, I'm trying to imagine this like in an exhibition, like as part of an exhibition. And if it was in an exhibition, would it have to be static, or could it evolve on site? Could participants kind of be adding to it on site, or is it static? I asked you twice now.
No worries. I would say it depends on, you have two options. If you wanted to do like a web page, kind of like what I showed, where it's like online and you're not able to edit it, you wouldn't be able to change it. You would have to regenerate the website and then upload it to your server every once in a while. Or you could just have the actual application on some kind of computer and then have people add to it that way. So that's the way that you could get people to add it. What I had to do, sorry, I just have to get some water here. What I had to do for my project is I had to set a time where people could contribute and add to the database. And I had to use a separate app to collect things because this doesn't allow for real-time collaboration as of yet. So it's like a personal knowledge management. So it's really made for one person or one user to use at a time. So if it was like in a gallery space where you would want people to add it, it would have to be on some kind of computer monitor or computer stick, and people would have to kind of interact with it. They could interact with it as a group, but you wouldn't be able to have multiple people editing the same thing because it would create like file conflicts. So yeah, to answer your question, you could either have this application itself installed on a device that could support it, or you could have you could collect the info separately and then add it yourself, and then kind of publish it on your computer and just link people to the live link, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
I can go next. This is so cool. I've seen someone give an obsidian workshop before, but aesthetically, I wasn't really vibing with it. And this looks so nice the way that you've set it up. So it's giving me hope that maybe this will be something that I can use in the future. My question was about kind of like open source in regards to also like academic work and maybe your own master's thesis as well, because so much of academic work is done behind the scenes. And even in my own PhD cohort, we've been having conversations around creating more open source PhD theses. And that's not just including like the finished product, but also the steps to get there. So our note taking, our like broader literature scans, our archival documents. Did you have any like considerations about putting your whole, like everything that went into your master's project beyond the creation part of the research creation aspect? Did you think to maybe put the rest of your MA project into a similar network, or even if you use this in terms of like note taking as well for the rest of your MA thesis?
So I initially found this software because I was looking for something to take notes for like the writing part of my thesis, because I was having a hard time keeping track of all the ideas that I was getting and references and linking them to this thing that's in this folder on this computer and whatnot. So that's initially how I use it. I think I got a bit sidetracked in the thesis writing of things, so my I guess graph for my thesis writing is all over the place. It is something that I would like to do. I would like to, share my notes and that kind of thing publicly, but I think this would be like a good way of doing that, or of using that. So yeah, I don't have my thesis writing things published publicly, but what I do have, if I go back to the thesis website, I do have a GitHub. Where is it? Yes, here it is. I do have a GitHub where I put as much as I could out there as open source. So the memory graph itself is on GitHub. So if you wanted to look at the files and inspect those, it's out there. In terms of like the process of creating these things, that's, like I said, something that I'm working on, like a tutorial series, but it would have to be really polished and detailed and really take you through a step by step, because this is more of like an overview of what I did. And then the database as well. So it was initially on Airtable, which isn't open source, and I moved it over to NokuDB, which is open source. So you can access all of the entries from the study in here and even download them.
Recreate the sound.
On my browser, it doesn't download, it like opens a preview first, but you should be able to download them and remix it, because it's licensed as CC BY NC non-commercial attribution. So this is a participants and I worked on what license we wanted to set for the database and what license we were comfortable with, and we settled with this one. So a lot of parts of the project are already open source, but I am working on sharing a bit more, like you said, process and that kind of thing.
I think Simon and Alex had a question. Simon, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your presentation, Candide. So my question you already started to answer a bit. And it was really just to ask you more about your journey to the software. So you mentioned that you were note-taking before and using Lockseed, and I just want to know more about how you arrived to fit this project into that software. And if you tried anything else. It sounds like the project existed before realizing this tool would be compatible with it. And I just wanted more insight into that. Thank you.
Yes, 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 yes. So I guess I talk more about it in the thesis document in a lot of detail, maybe a bit too much detail, but essentially I always had the idea of like connecting audio segments and building on top of people's ideas, but I just didn't know how that would look. And it kind of started with another project that I worked on in grad school with my classmate. And actually, I think I have a slide on that in here that I hid because I wasn't sure if I would have time to discuss it. But yeah, it was a project where we interviewed our friends and family about their relationship to languages. And my classmate is Kenyan, I'm Congolese. There was a lot of overlap with our own experiences and with some of the stories that people were sharing. And I found that as nice as it was to interview people and ask them a question and they answer, ask a question, they answer, I felt like it was a bit limiting. And I thought it would be nice if people could interact with each other. So it kind of started with that. So that was a year before I got into like the thesis writing part of things. Just this idea of like, what if participants could just interact with each other instead of I'm like the interviewer and I'm asking you a question and there's not a lot of cross-pollination, if that makes sense. So it started there, and I started about thinking about like how to visualize that of people talking to each other and tangents and kind of going off on conversation. So like the idea of a network graph was always there, but I just didn't know how to create it. And because I studied like digital futures, which is very technical, and they kind of expect you to build out what you want to create, I really struggled with trying to figure out how to do that from scratch. So there was this project, and then there's the idea of getting multiple people to talk to each other, and then there was also just the process of having to write this thesis. So initially I used the brain, which is pretty similar to this software, and it was really nice. But then the free trial expired, and there's all kinds of limitations. The free trial expired, and then if you're using the free, I guess, version, you couldn't link to local assets on your computer. And I was trying to figure out, well, if I wanted to display this in a gallery, it has to be, I would prefer if it's hosted online. Then how can I connect, media assets that are hosted online on here? So there was a lot of limitations with the brain. So then that's when I set out to try out other things. And I did try Obsidian, which was nice. It wasn't open source, but it is also a nice program. I think the reason why I chose LockSeek was because I was able to change the theming. So over that year, I dived deeper into HTML and CSS customizations, which I knew a bit of before, but really had to accelerate that learning to do this. And that's how I was able to really change the theme and publish it online. So Obsidian also has like a online publishing feature, but I think you have to pay for it. So my idea was finding something that was open source and affordable so that other people could reproduce the project. So yes, a lot of the components of this thesis or theories or thinkings are things that seemed unrelated at the time. Then you kind of cobbled it together and found some connections between things, if that makes sense.
It did. Thank you.
Alex, and then I think Alice also has a question. So go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Candide. It's super interesting. My question, I'm still kind of formulating it in my head, so sorry if it comes off confusing, but I'm thinking about, it was really interesting to hear you talk about like archives and oral histories and like how, just how kind of like more non-linear ways of collecting and keeping information. And then I was also just like thinking about digital archives in themselves, and like, this is a really great digital archive. It's such a cool example. But then I was also thinking about like archival practices in museums and how it's such a difficult challenge right now to archive digital things. So like if you have game consoles, they're going to go out of, they're not going to work anymore on any screen in like 20 years. Yeah. And like the website's going to maybe like die after a few years because you're not going to keep paying the fee to keep it going. And so it's like, we have this idea, I think, that like digital, and I'm sure you probably are thinking about this all the time, like this idea that like digital things, they seem like so permanent, but they're actually like very ephemeral, even more than like paper or even more than, and And when you're talking about oral histories, I'm like, wow, that's really like the most solid kind of example of like archives. And so I see how you're trying to bring it into the digital, but I'm wondering, like, have you thought about like the long-term storage of this and like how it could live on? And does open source play into that at all? Like, are you able to kind of just copy the code and then keep kind of reformatting it in new versions? So yeah, just lots of thoughts about that.
Yeah, and those are some really great thoughts, and like you said, thoughts that I was toying around with, and maybe I don't have the full answers to. Um, yeah, where to start? So it's true. I think we a lot of times we think that I'm like I have my thesis open on the side here so I can like refresh my memory. There's this quote by Chen here that says the promise of digital computers as permanent memory machines, but it's kind of deceptive because it's not, right? Because I had to set up a lot of things and learn a lot about web technologies within the year of working on my thesis. Things like, for example, this domain name, right? It's something that I purchased. I purchased it for 10 years because I thought, okay, if I'm going to put this on my thesis document, I want it to be there forever, but it's not going to be there forever because someone has to go in and renew that domain. And that's just one part of keeping things online. So then I was like, okay, maybe I put it on GitHub so that even if it goes offline here, someone could download it on here and just access it on their own computers. But then, what if GitHub doesn't exist in 25 years? Or what if it gets bought out? Or what if this happens and that happens? So the idea of using open formats for me was important because they're, for the most part, pretty portable. So being able to export my graph as like a static website is great because like HTML has been around for a long time. It can be opened on your computer. You can open it on most browsers. It's something that I have confidence that will be able to be opened and accessed in the future. Maybe some of the other components that Lockseek adds in there, like the JavaScript whatnots, maybe they won't work as well in the future, like we saw with Flash. Who knows? But I think for the most part, because the project exists in different forms, I know that maybe some forms of it will exist in the future. And you know what? Even if it completely goes away, I always think about the conversations I've had with people who interacted with the work, and I feel like maybe hearing a segment sparked something in them, and they had a conversation with someone, and that led to another conversation. So for me, it kind of the project lives on in that way as well. So I don't know. Trying to make sure I answered every part of your question. But yeah, using open source software for me was important to think about that longevity and long term. And that's also the reason why I switched from using Airtable to NocoDB, because how can I explain this? So NocoDB is it's an open source version of Airtable, but you have to host it yourself. So you have to find somewhere that can host it, and then it creates a database. So you have a database with all the information, and then you have the application itself that you host. But if, let's say, the host that I'm using decides to go out of business, or I decide that I want to move, it would be pretty easy to move that over to another software program. Whereas if Airtable, which is like a proprietary software as a service company, if they decide to shut things down or restrict or free plan or whatever, there's no way for me to remove all that information. And the nice thing about this program too is that when I uploaded the audio files, I could choose the storage for those media assets. So it's kind of like things are decoupled and not fragmented, but there's multiple points, whereas with a lot of proprietary software, it's just all in one, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes or where things are stored, or whether if you delete something, it's really deleted, and that kind of thing. So it was a bit all over the place, but yeah, those are definitely things that I think about a lot. And there's pros and cons. At some points, you're like, how important is it for this thing to be open source? Because now it's taking all these steps to do one thing where it could just be really simple. It could just use one tool that just does it all, and I don't have to think about updating things and doing whatnot. And that's also important when you want to share with other people how you did your process so that they could recreate it. So those are the tensions that a lot of the things I thought about as I was doing my project.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I could just jump in here because it's a great segue into some things that I was thinking of, and congratulations on on your research creation, on completing the degree. Sorry. And yeah, and I was thinking, so as a media art historian, I'm also thinking about ways in which the artist thinks about digital futures in terms of how you think your work will be archived in the future, right? And the ways in which research creation is, okay, so there's the research about the process, and when you're working with competition, platforms, and you have to, that's a huge part of the experimentation. And then there's the creative thought process that goes behind it. And I can't help but think that this is going to be the lifeline to preserve and conserve the research creation project in the future, because all like what Alex was saying, these things are going to be obsolete, and I mean they're obsolete yesterday kind of thing.
Yeah.
I never really catch them, but it's the concept, it's the idea, and I keep hanging on to just things you mentioned, but they're gems in a way. Whenever each time you say sample, each time you say audio segment or media asset, those are what is being sampled, being remixed, being, there's relations that are activated there. There's a sonic aspect that actually we don't have time to go into, but it would be really interesting. You mentioned at one point people break out in song, I just love that. And I'm wondering if there was a way to theorize that and push that so that that becomes very a very obvious part of the project that can be archived. You know what I mean? Because I'm thinking, like, you must know Andrea Fatona's center.
Yeah.
And she's thinking about that. And I mean, maybe that's, this is a touching point. Like, I'd love to continue our conversation about futurisms, but also just to tell the group that, I mean, this is ideal because Andrea's center is about archiving digital material, and how do we archive that? And one of the things she's interested in is, once you archive it, how do you activate it? And so that it just doesn't sit there,
Yeah.
and through sampling. This idea of sampling. So maybe we should have a conversation. Yeah, but congratulations. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or maybe comments or ideas to share? Because I think there are lots of points that have been touched by every of you. They can be expanded in different ways, but if anybody else would like to enter the conversation with Candide, or are we ready to wrap up? But Candy, yourself, if you want to something that has a sparkle in you and you would like to share after all these questions and reflections, please feel free to also talk more.
I guess I did want to talk. I know someone mentioned open source, and that made me think of something that I wrote about, and that I kind of realized because before I started my my studies, like I was always a big fan of open source software, and I knew that it would be like a big part of the project I would work on. But I think I approach open source as like, oh, it's this free thing that I can just like use and I don't have to pay for it and grade and that kind of thing. But over time, I kind of realized the importance of giving back and contributing to the community and not having a relationship with open source software and community and developers in like an extractive way. And I think there's probably some parallel to do with the themes of my project, but I've just been thinking about how do I give back. So I've been doing a lot of contributions or monetary donations or however the the maintainers of that project want you to contribute, which they usually outline. So I think that's something that I wanted to also highlight, is just thinking about if you're using the software, how can you also give back and, you know, contribute to the community as well. So yeah.
I may have a fun, just a question of curiosity, because you've been sharing probably this project with other people, but I was wondering what were kind of like after this experience and contributing, and the people, the 7 participants that have contributed, how is it circulated like to the diasporic communities as well? How have you tried to reach out to them with all of these like connections? And there were some memories to make them also part of like this way of like expanding like the archive in the person. So I was wondering how this has been circulated so far since you kind of wrap it up on the website.
Yeah, so in terms of circulation, it's mainly been workshops like this one, and it's been exhibitions. So it's been exhibited, I guess, in larger exhibitions like the GradX and our thesis exhibition, but also in Black Spaces, mainly in Toronto when I was living there. So it's been circulated in that way. I would say in terms of expanding the database, that's not something that I have in mind or that's been the process. I'm, I guess, big on like just small interactions between, not small interactions, interactions between a small number of people. It's never to like catalog all the interactions between the entire diaspora. It's more these small connections, kind of like the Twitter spaces that I was talking about earlier, of just these meaningful conversations between people and how others can listen in and kind of maybe spark some ideas and create their own conversations and riff off of that separately, if that makes sense, to create like another network of things. So that's how I see it expanding, not necessarily in like expanding in content and volume and entries and segments, but just expanding in awareness and people talking about it or creating their own version or using the software to do something else.
Thank you, Candide. Well, I think we can wrap up now. Thank you so much for this presentation and the tutorial as well. Actually, as more of the ESPC, I think you just gave us an open platform and media to use for a project we're considering that also it's kind of mapping things. So thank you so much for this. Everyone, have a great evening and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.